I guess we're looking at Congressional District 32.
Good.
Will the candidates make their way up the stage, please? Paul Brown, Russ Ramsland, Sherry Rothney. Did I miss something? What did I miss? Well, yeah, that. No, I thought there was something else going on. Pete Sessions. Florida. Oh, right. Sorry. It's been a long day already for me. We're right over there. Did you guys tally the straw poll, or are you guys doing that right now? They're doing that right now as we speak. While these folks get seated and get ready, you know, I've had a couple of conversations with some of my more liberal friends of the last couple of years. They really don't like the Tea Party. I have come to know that, and because, well, I imagine there's sources of information about who the Tea Party is, what they stand for, what members of the Tea Party stand for, is so distorted. I mean, if you watch Chris Matthews, who called Ted Cruz, what did he call him yesterday? I just played the soundbite today on the show. It was nothing that was unflattering. Subhuman, I think, is where it went. If that's where you're getting your information, folks, I just don't think you're going to be well informed. Would you please welcome our candidates running for Congressional District 32? Paul Brown, Russ Ramsland, and Sherry Rothney. All of which I had the privilege of interviewing on the show. Thank you guys for, and again, it's our second forum together. Nice to see you all again. Thank you. It's good to be here. Okay, we will try to vary up the orders here. We'll go with Ms. Rothney first, ladies first. Representative Sessions recently voted for the omnibus bill. Show of hands, how many of you guys actually hear the show? The Chris Salcedo show? Okay, to the rest of you, come on. But, in the interest of full disclosure, ladies and gentlemen, I am not a huge fan of this omnibus bill. So I want to put that out there. It funded the government through discretionary spending until September of this year, and then it also funded many of the agencies, the EPA, the Bureau of Land Management, well into 2017. Praise God, long after Obama was out of office. Obamacare, his executive inaction memo, which many classify as executive amnesty, and of course the refugee resettlement. How would you have voted on the omnibus bill, Ms. Rothney?
No. No.
You might want to use one of those for the folks in the back.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
I would have said absolutely not. No. It should not have been voted. In fact, it should not have been brought out to the floor. Mr. Sessions is chairman of the Rules Committee. And he could have said no.
A little closer there.
No, we're not going to bring it to the floor for a vote. Sometimes you have to have conviction, and you have to stand for it. You can't be a politician of convenience, because you hurt the country. In that instance, we really, really hurt our nation. We funded the refugee situation, healthcare. We needed to stop it right there. We should not have funded it till 2016. Now, come January, they decided, well, we're going to repeal it. You funded it. It's too late. So I would have voted no on it.
All right, and you explained your reasonings quite well. All right, we'll go with Mr. Ramsland next, sir.
Well, I certainly would have voted no on it. I'm not surprised that we got the kind of votes we did. You know, if we look at what's going on, we've got a congressman who says that he's really got us back to 2008 spending levels. Really? In 2008, we spent $3 trillion. This year, we're supposed to spend $3.99 trillion. Now, even with my shoes and socks on, I can do this math. And so that is not a reduction in spending. But worse than that is that they took the only victory they'd had, which was a sequester, and they lifted the ceiling $80 billion, 50 in the current year and 30 for next year. And do you know that despite all the pressure we're trying to get on them to repeal just the $30 billion, and by the way, for those of you who haven't got your shoes and socks on and are doing the math, that's 0.07%. We're still getting pushback from our own Republican leadership about just that one little tiny item. So it's not surprising that they voted an extra $100 million for the Syrian refugee resettlement program. They fully funded Planned Parenthood. They fully funded Obamacare. They fully funded almost everything that you hate, including the Every Student Succeeds Act that more deeply embeds Common Core into our schools until 2021, well into the second term of our next president.
We'll go to Mr. Brown with an addition to that. But Republicans would be blamed for shutting down the government.
Great question. No, I would not vote for the omnibus spending bill. And I believe that it's been covered beautifully already, but one thing I want to add on top of that is, look, this spending bill included hundreds of billions of dollars of deficit spending. We have over $19 trillion in national debt. We cannot afford any more deficit spending. And furthermore, we need to spend significantly less than we're bringing in if we really have any hope of tackling this debt. And that means making some tough decisions, all right? Anyone who's had a budget, especially if you've ever had to cut back on your budget, knows that's very hard. It is very hard. And if you're the individual in the family making that decision, you're not necessarily going to be popular with everyone else in the family, all right? No more pizza night on Friday. Sorry. Guess what? The kids aren't going to be happy about that. But you know what? Someone has to be the adult and make the decisions. And if the Republican Party is blamed for being the adults and making the decisions, then so be it. That's the tough part about being an adult. And that's what we need in Congress is adults. People that are willing to take responsibility instead of saying, hey, I don't want to be the bad guy. We're going to look bad. We're going to lose the election. Well, you know what? If you're not willing to do the right thing, then there's no point for you to get reelected in the first place. And that is where we're at as a country. That's where the Republican Party is. And that's why people are, I've personally been to over 12,000 houses in the district so far. And I've talked to a lot of people who say, you know what, I don't send money to the Republican Party anymore. I don't send money to the RNC. And I always say good. Because as a party at large, they're not representing us. And the way we're going to change that is by putting people in office who do. That's why we're running, that's why I'm running, and that's why I'm determined to beat Pete Sessions and represent the people of District 32.
A follow-up, brief answers, please, to this. The Supreme Court just voted in a 5-4 decision to stay Obama's EPA regulations that would have... you all know Obama has had a red target painted on Texas as he took office. He understood if there was going to be an organized resistance to him, it would be from here. So he has had this target painted on us, and thankfully one branch of the federal government was standing up for the people, and that was the Supreme Court. I observed today that our elected leaders didn't stand up for us. And not only that, because of this omnibus, would you agree with me that they not only did they not stand up for us, right now they no longer have the ability to stand up to Obama on our behalf? Ms. Rafferty.
Well, over and over again, we've seen Republican leaders up in Washington, D.C. not standing for the conservative cause. And it is so dangerous because if you see from the time Obama became president in these last 7+ years, socialism has taken root. Crony capitalism has taken root. We have forgotten what the Constitution is all about. Rather than governing based on the Constitution of the United States, we have Republican leadership up there playing footsie. We don't want that anymore. We want to be governed with laws and regulations being enforced, the Constitution of the United States being followed, our borders secure, our nation secure, our healthcare secure, and our children being educated so they can be future leaders and have the knowledge where we don't have to have all these H-1B visa people coming in, because, like, for instance, I met an engineer yesterday from TI, and he said, well, we need more H-1B visas because we don't have kids coming out that are qualified to take these jobs that we have. And he himself came here on an H-1B visa from the Philippines. So, to me, that means our education system needs to be improved if that's the case. So, I say our conservative leaders need to lead and follow what our Constitution, follow the laws and regulations, make sure our children are coming out of high school prepared to go into universities and get the qualifications needed so they can fill the jobs that are available in America.
Mr. Brown, did our elected leaders give up their ability to defend us from Obama when they gave up the power of the purse?
Yes, they did it this time, but it's never too late to take it back. And that's why I'm running, because, I constantly hear excuses from our representatives. Well, we had to do it like this because of this, or, well, we got mandatory spending. Oh, you are the elected representative. They are, rather, and they are responsible for how we spend. These things can be repealed. We don't have to pass any spending. I don't care if it falls under discretionary spending or mandatory spending. Our U.S. representatives currently are the ones responding for what we spend. The U.S. House of Representatives has the power of the purse, and they need to exercise it, or else they need to take responsibility for the $20 trillion we have in debt, and we need to start exploring other options.
Yes, they gave up the power of the purse, and that is the one thing that the House of Representatives was given. In fact, if you read Madison's Federalist number 58, it says that the power of the purse given to the House is probably the most powerful weapon with which any constitution can arm its direct representatives of the people. And yet, they have totally surrendered it. Pre-surrendered, by the way. There are so many ways that they could have reined in this president. Let's just take just one tiny example. This president has decided that he's not going to obey the law where welfare is concerned. So what he's done is he's ignored all this, and we very easily, under discretionary spending, the very spending that even Pete Sessions says they could do something about, we could have cut that back until the president decided that he was going to start obeying the law. Now, what would that do? Well, for one thing, if you just look at the population of people who are able-bodied, single, so they don't have to support families, and are of working age, those ranks have swelled from over 2 million to 5.5 million people on the roll today. If you just corrected that one problem, you would save about $9 billion a year. So we absolutely can control this. You can change mandatory spending. It's more difficult with riders, but it certainly can be done, and then you change the policies underneath them. But a lot of times that's how you change the policies, is with riders. If you will not put riders on, you almost certainly can't change the policy, and these guys have been utterly unwilling to do any of that.
All right, this is a procedural question. How many folks in here know what regular order means? Okay, regular order is a process by the way our government is funded. 12 appropriations bills are supposed to be generated every year to make it transparent so we the people know how much of our money they're spending and what they're spending it on. We haven't done that in an awful long time in this country. What, 20 years? At least. And that has led to this governing by crisis, which says, we have to catch up to the government. So the Democrats and some complicit folks up there in the Republican Party have been doing this over these last few years. How important is it to each of you to get back to regular order? 30-second responses, please. And Mr. Ramsden, we'll go with you first.
I think it's incredibly important because the House is being run as a dictatorship right now. The Rules Committee, of which Pete Sessions is the chairman, colludes with the speaker, and he is the guy who's the gatekeeper to everything that goes on the floor. So what the speaker writes or what his lobbyists write are the only things that get on the floor. They stop the amendments of any of the conservatives, and we effectively disenfranchise 430 of the 435 members of this House. It's critical if we want to get back to representative government that we get back to regular order.
All right, Ms. Romney, you're next.
I absolutely agree with that. They just have been waiting for crisis after crisis. Come December, then they have to go home. So come midnight, they don't even read the bills. They just pass it and on they go. And then they come back again, and with next December, we're in a crisis again. And they're always saying, well, we can't shut it down because what's going to happen to all these people? Well, sometimes you have to do the right thing. And when is Pete going to do the right thing? When is Pete going to do the right thing? It's time to term limit him. Let's vote him out. Let's bring him back to Florida.
Mr. Brown, regular order, important?
Yes, it's essential that we return to regular order. I always like to keep my feet firmly on the ground, though, and since I know that I'm probably not going to be appointed the chairman of the Rules Committee as a freshman, probably we're still going to have to deal with a bunch of other congressmen that don't want to have to return to regular order. In absence of that, I'm going to keep voting against these spending bills they try to ram down our throats. And maybe it'll happen this election cycle, or maybe the next election cycle we'll get enough people that are willing to vote that way and are willing to support regular order that we'll get it.
All right. Folks, and also many believe that this process is what leads us to 19 going on $20 trillion in national debt. As a country, I think everybody here agrees we need to address illegal immigration. And we also need to address legal immigration. Our antiquated system of immigration is just that. 1950s was the last time really it was addressed. What are the steps we need to do this? Address both, if you will. Reform of legal immigration into this country, and then stopping illegal immigration. And Mr. Brown, we'll go with you first.
Great. This is about a 15-minute conversation I'm going to condense into a minute 30. I'm glad we brought up both because both are very important. And I'll start with the legal. I think on average it takes something like 9 years to become a legal citizen of the United States. I think that's an unnecessarily long amount of time. I think the government can be streamlined in all areas, including in that process, and I think we can streamline it and make it a little more efficient because the people that do the work to come in here legally, that are willing to do it, we don't need to slow them down that much. Now, illegally, there's a lot we need to do. We've got to enforce the laws we have. We're not enforcing those laws. That's an impeachable offense for the president and for the director of ICE, director of Customs and Border Patrol. Beyond that, we can strengthen our border. You know, a wall or a fence would certainly help, and better, more effective patrols would help, but we've got to really address the cause of illegal immigration, which is our economic policies. Look, in the United States, it is extremely expensive to hire legal citizens. You've got the minimum wage, Obamacare, Social Security, Medicare, regulations that all pile onto the cost and make it prohibitively expensive in many industries to hire people. And if we really want to address illegal immigration, we have got to address our economic policies that make it so prohibitive to hire in the United States.
All right, Mr. Brown, with this addendum to that as well, that we have, I believe it's 3 border fence bills that have been passed by the Congress, have been signed into law by a sitting president, and they're not funded. But yet there is no cry. I should have said Mr. Ramsland. Sorry, Mr. Ramsland. There's no cry from our liberal friends across the aisle, or certainly no Republicans, that the government isn't fully funded when it comes to that. Why do you think that is, sir?
Well, I think the fact of the matter is that there are some huge money interests in this country that are really on board for amnesty, for open borders, for low wages, and they're taking a very short-term view. They don't understand that what they're going to do is wipe out the middle class, and that's what provides stability for this country. That's what provides the steps in the ladder that we need for people in the lower classes to be able to work their way out of their poverty situation. And then that leads into this whole sense of hopelessness where they then just simply live on the government. So we've got to address that that particular issue.
All right, and then on legal immigration?
Oh, on legal immigration, well, there's two kinds of people that cross borders. There are conqueror colonists, and these are people like we were in the 14, 15, and 1600s. We came here to conquer this country. We did not come here to go live in Indian teepees or any of that kind of business. And then there are people who come here to assimilate. And we need to be able to recognize in our immigration policy the difference in that. Because, for instance, Sharia are people who come here not to assimilate, they come here to conquer. And let's just be real clear about that. And that's what destroys that rule of law, which is number 5 over there. So we need to, we certainly need to have an immigration system that takes into account how long it takes to assimilate people. You cannot set numbers until you can begin to think about how long it takes to assimilate people. And that is the key to this country.
Ms. Robney, legal and illegal immigration solutions for both?
Both. Legal immigration, for one thing, I would say we have to review the immigration policies line by line. Now, I am a legal immigrant here that became a naturalized citizen, so I'm speaking from experience. When my family came here, it took us about 3 years just to get a visa to come to America. And once
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can I just ask you really quickly?
Yes.
How you felt when you saw thousands, tens of thousands of illegal immigrant children and their families being escorted from our southern border, given accommodations here, and then relocated to the United States. They waited, what, 36 hours, 48 hours to get into the United States of America? You waited 3 years? How did that make you feel?
Well, I'm more infuriated at parents and government authorities, let's say, wherever they came. If they came from Honduras, if they came from Guatemala, if they came from Ecuador, if they came from Mexico, how could those individuals allow these unaccompanied minors to get out of that country and pour into our borders? And I'm also furious with our government officials allowing these children to come in with no telling what kind of tropical diseases that our people over here may not be protected against. Now we hear Zika virus. So it is also a public health danger. So I am disappointed, I'm furious with the government officials in the United States, in Mexico, in south of the border.
All right. Mr. Ramsland addressed this assimilation versus diversity issue. Mr. Brown, you want to take a stab at that as well? I mean, have we stopped insisting on folks becoming American? Is that a problem?
I think in any nation, if you're going to go live there, if you're trying to naturalize, the word is in itself, naturalize. You want to become natural to that environment. But also, I think it's very important that we look at the laws and we look at the fact that, hey, look, you can still hold on to part of your heritage. That's why around our country you've got Little Italy and Chinatown and little places like that. I think you can hold on to your heritage and be a very good American. But yeah, there are people that come here and don't try to assimilate at all, and they're clearly the wrong kinds.
Ms. Robin, you want to take a stab at that as well?
And I will tell you why that is. Because we have brought in refugees, we have brought in economic refugees, political refugees. And when they get naturalized, an example, they speak Vietnamese. So they provide them a Vietnamese translator. Now, call your bank. What comes on? Is it English or is it English and Spanish?
Press 1. Press 2.
Excuse me? We need to make English the official language of our country. And that's what's wrong. We are bending over backwards, accommodating everyone, and instead of taking care of Americans. We need to take care of Americans, we need to speak English, and that should be an expectation and nothing else.
Mr. Ramsland. In the news lately, with a very well-known Texas senator, ethanol became very hotly discussed, and he won too. The Export-Import Bank, what many consider crony capitalism, also very hotly debated. What are your positions on these two, ethanol subsidies and the Export-Import Bank?
I'm against subsidies in general. They distort the market. I mean, if the product is really a good product, then it will sell. And if it's not, then someone's going to work on it long enough to either decide it's a dead end, or they're going to make it to where it's attractive enough in its price-performance ratio that people are going to buy it. And that's how the standard of living gets raised. It doesn't get raised by all of these subsidies that artificially transfer money to the people that have the best lobbyists. So I'm against subsidies across the board. As far as the Import-Export Bank, it's the same thing, Chapter 2. There is very little value in the Import-Export Bank other than to a few very, very large corporations that also happen to be huge lobbyist givers to the Congress. So I would have let the Import-Export Bank go. We had it dead. There was no reason to bring it back except the lobbyists showed up. And I'm against ethanol subsidies as well as other subsidies.
All right, and before we go on to Mr. Brown, I want to get a time check, guys. How much time do we have left?
15 minutes.
15 minutes, roger that. Mr. Brown?
Yeah, similarly, I'm also against any kind of subsidies, and specifically ethanol subsidies. Ethanol is not good for the environment. The cost to create it is huge. It raises the cost of a lot of our food products, and then additionally, it really isn't good for the environment. It's amazing how many of these environmental initiatives really just come down to filling someone's bank account and really have nothing to do with helping the environment. But again, yes, subsidies in general are very bad, and specifically with ethanol, even worse. Same thing with the Import-Export Bank. It shouldn't exist. Look, the federal government should exist to do a couple of things, and that is basically to provide national defense, to handle our national currency, and to conduct foreign policy. Beyond that, it should be doing almost nothing else. But we've been talking again and again about spending. We've got roughly $4 trillion our federal government is spending, and they spend it on nonsense like the Import-Export Bank and ethanol and all kinds of other stuff. And the way we stop that is in the U.S. House of Representatives through the power of the purse. That's what we're here to do.
And Ms. Robney, what do you think? Both of those, ethanol and the Export-Import Bank.
Yeah, both have to, if we have to stop subsidizing, period. We don't have any alternative. We can't do that because the people we are subsidizing are people that can afford to be in business without the subsidies. And that is what's wrong up in Washington, D.C. They keep subsidizing. For instance, when they brought healthcare, the changes in healthcare, they subsidized the physicians and the hospitals and all the corporations to adopt this electronic health record. And they said, if you adopt it, we will give you so many thousands of dollars. All right? Now, what happened with that healthcare law is now all of us, our private information is out there in cyberspace. The government knows everything about you. All right? They already know everything about you when you drive down the street with all the cameras. They know exactly what you buy with the credit card you use. Now they know everything that's wrong with your body. All right? And whether you're depressed or happy, and where you sleep and who you sleep with and who you don't sleep with. And that's none of the federal government's business. But then they subsidize the healthcare corporations. And the same thing, they have no business subsidizing ethanol, Import-Export Bank. We cut.
All right.
And then we'll slowly get our deficit. Yeah.
Let's all concede that nobody in this room particularly fond of Obamacare, shall we? Okay. Now, I did an interview with Michael Burgess back in 2010, and he admitted to me on the air when he said, well, one of the biggest frustrations I have, he's a medical doctor, as many of us know, that the Republicans have not put up an alternative to Obamacare. They didn't give the American people a choice. So, let's all concede that Obamacare bad. What is your idea to replace it and be perhaps a leader leading the way inside of the House of Representatives if you are lucky enough to get there? And Mr. Brown, we'll go with you first.
Okay, now we need to condense a 30-minute conversation into a minute and a half. You know, I talked about this with the Dallas Morning News. One of the first things I would personally push to cut is Medicaid. It's socialism. It's socialized medicine. And in fact, when Medicaid and Medicare were both passed in 1965, that is when the price of healthcare started to skyrocket well above the Consumer Price Index. Before that, it was on track with the Consumer Price Index. It's the exact same graph you see economically with the Department of Education in 1980 and the correlating cost of education after that. It's absurd. Look, the alternative that we need to present to Obamacare is getting the government out of healthcare as much as possible. All right? First of all, you can clearly cut Obamacare. You can also clearly cut Medicaid. And ultimately, eventually, although we have to honor what people have paid into it, we need to try to get away from Medicare too. It is not the government's business to be involved in healthcare. Just like it's not the government's business to be involved in the Import-Export Bank or subsidies and on and on and on. Again, this is a 30-minute conversation, but the other side of the coin, besides getting government out, is also repealing laws that are crony capitalistic in nature that favor insurance companies over the healthcare providers, over the patients, and so on. And that is going to be a sticky process, but it's something that we can do whether or not we even repeal the other items.
Ms. Rothney, what do you think? Alternative to Obamacare.
I say get the federal government out of.
I was wondering where you're going with that.
Well, healthcare should be between the patient and the doctor. The government has no business being in it. And insurance companies, if they want to insure, then you pay for it. You don't come between the patient and the doctor and tell them, no, we're not going to cover this. Oh, doctor, why did you keep the patient in an extra day? So they tell the patient, we're not going to pay for it. So your doctor's going to have to explain to them why the patient had to stay in an extra day. The government has made it so complicated. Go back to the patient and the doctor. Simple things, let the patient pay for it. Catastrophic things, then have insurance for it. You crash your car, you'll have insurance. If you need an oil change, you pay for it.
Mr. Aslan, it sounds like she's advocating back to a fee-for-service, utilizing catastrophic loss policies to handle the cancer diagnosis are going to get by a bus. So what say you?
Well, I agree with that. We basically have prepaid health care in this country that you purchase from insurance companies. And that's created a bizarre situation that led to Obamacare where basically, it's like, I call it veterinary medicine. The doctor is the veterinarian, the owner is the U.S. government, and you're the dog. And that's a problem. So what we've got to do is we've got to get out of the prepaid health care insurance model. You don't insure the filters in your furnace in your house insurance. You don't insure the oil and the spark plugs and the air in your tires when you get car insurance. All of those things are fee-for-service kinds of stuff, and we need to get back to that model. Because what happens in the prepaid model is that we no longer have a price that means anything. Insurance companies come in to doctors and they say, we'll give you 60% of whatever is your rack rate. So the doc says, okay, well that means I got to jack up my rack rate in order to get enough from the insurance companies. Then what happens when the free market tries to come in and purchase from that doctor? If the doctor doesn't charge the rack rate, it's insurance fraud. Do you understand how this whole thing keeps just driving the price up that way? That's what we've got to get rid of. Until we get rid of the prepaid, fully insured model and get back to a health savings account model that are pre-tax and that you can pass along to your children outside of your estate and that you don't lose every year, and then you move that into a pay-for-services model with insurance only for catastrophic, we're not going to get back to a free market.
All right, very well. All right, now let's move to some current events. I'm going to give you guys some headlines, and I'm looking forward to hearing all of your responses. But Mr. Brown, since you served the nation in the military, I can hardly wait to get your reaction. You're first up to handle this. Generals in our military have been told to consider climate change in all of their military decisions. I asked this question today openly on the radio station. So does that mean that they can defend America only if it's good for the planet? North Korea has just test fired an ICBM capable of carrying a nuclear payload into the United States. They have also launched a satellite that flew over the Super Bowl. And Iran has just released photos of our sailors crying in violation of the Geneva Convention, and our administration has done nothing. As a man who has served in the U.S. military, what do you think about the picture that is emblematic, at least in my mind anyway, of what Obama has meant to our military?
It's disgusting. I'm disgusted. This nation is disgusted. Our military is disgusted. And the world watches, disgusted and embarrassed at what was once the great United States, kowtowing to Iran, to North Korea, and to this phony scam of climate change to which so many of our fellow country members have succumbed. Look, early on in Obama's administration, I was hopeful that maybe he was just incompetent. But over time, you watched and you saw as decision after decision after decision was carefully calculated to literally hurt and destroy the United States. And he's been most effective in that area with the military. There's this issue of climate change. We're not talking about drafting women, just having women set up for the draft. This is absurd and it's wrong. And we're destroying our military, but we started destroying our military back in the 1950s when we refused to fight wars to win. And I wrote a book on this. It's called Total War, America's Roadmap to Victory. And Korea, we did it wrong. In Vietnam, we did it wrong. In Iraq, we did it wrong. In Afghanistan, we did it wrong. And not only did I deploy overseas, but I have a lot of friends and family members who have deployed to protect this country. But our own government is unwilling to commit to winning these conflicts. And it's unacceptable that since 2003, Congress has not passed a new authorization for use of military force. So those thousands of troops in Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria, Libya, the Philippines are there solely at the whim of the president with no acknowledgement, with no responsibility from Congress. And it must stop now.
Also, I've observed the headlines I just read off to you. I think everybody in here is indignant, even outraged. And our members of Congress, by and large, seem to be silent. Would you be?
Absolutely not. I think that this is a ridiculous situation. The Congress has totally ignored its responsibility where our national defense is concerned. That's true because of what they've let happen in our debt, which is a national security problem. You know, at 5% interest rates, we'll spend 1.5 times on interest that we do our national defense. That's a pretty terrifying thing to contemplate. But they've allowed our military to end up as basically just a very top-heavy administrative function. We had 229,000 briefcase carriers during the Reagan era. Today we have almost 1 million. That's created this incredible layer of decision makers so that where we could deploy the Minuteman ICBM from conception to deployment in 4 years and the Poseidon submarine from conception to deployment in 4 years, today it takes 21.5 years. We have more admirals than we have ships in the fleet. And during Reagan, which by the way didn't spend any more inflation-adjusted money than we are today, at the height of the Reagan buildup, 1987, we're spending the exact same inflation-adjusted money today. We had almost a 600 fleet Navy. Today we have 272. This Congress has been asleep. It's paid no attention, and it is absolutely abysmal. And we need to speak up about it.
Ms. Rodney, Mr. Brown read my mind. Women in the draft.
Well, you know, these days, everyone is wanting to be equal. And want to be, then get drafted. And you want to go and you say, well, equal rights, well, go to the front lines and serve. And I certainly don't want that. I have a daughter. But, you know, if the powers to be are going to say equal rights, and do whatever, well, let's all be equal.
All right. All right, now this is the last question, and 1 minute answers for me, please. I know that this is one of those 1 minute responses that requires about 10 years to get through. Our education system, we're not very competitive anymore. The government-run schools have, in my opinion, made it that way. What is an alternative that you can propose in Congress that would start addressing the competitiveness of our nation's government-run schools? And Ms. Robinson, we'll leave with you.
I say let's go back to basics. Simple. Math, reading, writing, arithmetic. Very, very basic. Just go back to the basics. Learn the subjects. Don't try to keep up with all these reinventing the wheel. You know, the latest thing is Common Core. We can't do that. We all learned the basics. Reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography, world science. And then as we got into the later part of high school and all of that, we learned chemistry, trigonometry, sciences. And now kids are learning how to paint and do whatever. And then they get to college, they can't read. So.
Yeah, legislatively, Mr. Ramsden, I want to focus on that as I get it over to you. And the alternatives that are available for lawmakers to, and missing from the equation quite often when government considers education is the parents.
And the question is?
The question is, what would a solution be to maybe get them back involved?
Oh, wow.
Or perhaps empower them?
Well, first thing we've got to do, I think, to encourage parents is to get rid of the Department of Education. Total waste of money. We ought to just block grant the money to the states. Those block grants ought to solely get phased out so that the states just are allowed to keep their own money in the first place, and we don't round trip it to Washington for a lot of it. Then you start having schools compete again. You know, it's very interesting that the Park Cities had such a reputation for great schools, because the fact is they were very, very competitive people. They wanted that school system. And then Plano came along and they wanted a competitive school system. And the localities and the states ought to have to compete with their school systems. That's exactly what we need if we want to have excellence in school systems. And the other thing we've got to do is we've got to have God return to the schoolroom, because that encourages parents when they see their children who are godly children and they come home and they are beautiful.
Mr. Brown?
Still the words right out of my mouth. We've got to get rid of the Department of Education. It's over $100 billion of waste per year, but worse than that, it has increased the cost of education directly. Higher education has inflated somewhere between 700% and 1,000% of what it should be, based on the track that was on the Consumer Price Index before the Department of Education existed in 1979. In lieu of that, any reduction of spending for the Federal Department of Education, any cuts in spending, I would be for. And talking about getting parents involved, you know, the federal government has worked for years to try to get rid of the family, to replace the family in every way, to break down the family. So I see the strongest and best way to get parents involved again is to pull the federal government out. And that's what we just talked about with Department of Education. You know, you get out of education what you put into it. And the people with the biggest disadvantages in this country are the ones that have the worst home lives. And what we've got to address, talking about God in this country, you know, not just God in the classroom, but God in this country. All right? When you have the kind of problems at home that a lot of these kids do, they're not focused on education. So.
All right. Folks, put your hands together for our candidates. CD32, and we will hear the closing statements from each one, and we will start off, or end where we started off with Ms. Robinson.
I I jumped into this race rather late, and I thought about it, and Mr. Sessions has been in his position, it'll be 20 years in November. And seeing the country and the direction it's taken, seeing socialism taking root, and all the changes that has occurred, the middle class being squeezed, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, the poor don't need to worry, they get government subsidies. The middle class backbone of this country is slowly disappearing. Now, the biggest worry for me is this socialism, and if we lose our freedom, we don't enforce our laws and regulations, we don't step up and cut all the waste, fraud, and abuse, and the corruption, crony capitalism, we are heading down a way that we will not recover from. And so I wanted to bring attention to this race, and that's one of the reasons I got into it. You have two other very qualified, excellent candidates. Whoever you vote for, you won't go wrong. Vote Pete out.
Yeah. All right, Mr. Brown.
I'm Paul Brown. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I worked in intelligence. I went to Iraq, started small businesses. And I've never run for office before, but you know what? We need completely different people in Washington. I have personally visited over 12,000 houses in the district so far because I'm absolutely determined to win this. We must win, and we must change the way Congress acts. So vote for me. Vote for Paul Brown as liberty, personal responsibility, integrity, and accountability. Those are the four core values upon which I've been running my campaign, upon which I've run my entire life, and upon which I'm going to run my office in Washington. Thank you all for coming here tonight. I'll be happy to answer any of your questions afterwards.
And Mr. Ramsey, you're back to clean up.
Nothing like to clean up better, right? You know, I'm interested in being in this race because ideas have consequences. This is a country that was founded on an ideal. It's the only empire in history that was founded on an ideal. All of the Persian, the Babylonian, the Assyrian, the English, all of them, they were formed for different reasons, military or economic or whatever. But we're an ideal. And the ideal here is freedom and liberty. Free people are not equal, and equal people are not free. The reason I am in this race is that I want to get to a podium level where we can begin to talk about these ideas at a high level instead of right here where we all are, while our congressmen are somewhere else doing whatever they're doing. And so I'm interested in doing this because I want to begin to talk about the ideas of freedom and liberty. I want to explain very clearly that socialism doesn't work because it's all about dividing a pie, and capitalism is all about growing the pie. It's not all that complicated, but we have to start talking about it at a high level. Thank you.
Russ Ramsland, Terry Rockney, Paul Brown, ladies and gentlemen. Congressional District 32.
Chris, can I just have a word? A very brief statement. I've been out and about in our district, visiting with a lot of people. And one thing I would like to encourage each and every one of my conservative friends and colleagues and neighbors, please reach out to the minority community. They feel very disenfranchised. They feel like they don't belong to the Republican Party, to the conservative movement. The ideas are very conservative. They just need to feel like we care and we really, really want them to be a part of the Republican Party.
And I will add to that. I've said it on the radio many times, and I tell it to those liberal friends I had mentioned to you before, that I have never felt as a liberty-loving Latino, those of you who know my show moniker, as a liberty-loving Latino, I have never felt more welcome or more embraced as a conservative than inside of a Tea Party anywhere in this state, or anywhere I've gone to a Tea Party. So don't let the Brian Williams press define you all. You define yourselves. Thank you, folks.